Alright folks, welcome back. So in part 1, Wallace got himself into a spot of bother once again, unsurprisingly. He left Riccarton and went to Auchencruive, where he was taken in by his uncle Duncan Wallace, and he hid out in the woods, but that was way too boring for Wallace, so he decided to visit the market at Ayr. He got into some, well, let's just say he got into a spot of bother with a lout in the marketplace who was boasting how great he was and how strong he was with his Bostius pole and how he was stronger than any two Scots put together, and any man who thinks he can hit me in the back of the head, I'll give, I'll let you have the chance for a groat. And Wallace says, I'll pay 3 groats. And the man turns his back and Wallace hits him in the back of the head, shattering his spine, and breaks the neck of another English soldier, and causes all sorts of havoc and mayhem and chaos before he finally has to run for his life. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, he decides to go back to Ayr the next market day, presumably a week later or a few weeks later or however long it was, not very long afterwards. Now the English are on the lookout for troublemakers, and a rare display of competence. And Wallace gets into another tussle with somebody who's harassing one of the servants of his uncle Ranald Crawford and trying to steal fish off them. And well, that didn't end very well for Wallace. He ended up taking on the whole of the garrison at Ayr all by himself, 80 men. He takes down a few of them. He decides he's going to go down fighting before his sword hilt breaks, and he's only got his dagger left. And well, it's not quite the same as Assassin's Creed, it didn't end very well for Wallace. He ended up getting speared and captured. And the English decide that they're going to teach Wallace a lesson. They're not just going to execute him, they're going to throw him in jail and let him rot and let him starve to death or die of disease first. Whatever one, happens to take his life quicker. Because his wounds are probably festering and, very likely he's got some sort of infection or gangrene or something like that. So it's a real race between disease and starvation, which one is going to take his life, So we start off with Wallace saying a prayer in the cell. All-powerful God, receive my pitiful body and soul, I humbly crave, for if I do not get relief soon I will die in this hellish dungeon. Eternal God, why should I die in this manner, as I have never lost belief in your mercy? You paid for my life, redeeming my soul from hell by your great sacrifice on the cross. Why did you honour me with your wonderful graces and make me strong by your handiwork if it is all for naught? I have asked for nothing but your help to save the many worthy people who tire under the yoke of oppression. O wearied sword of temper never true, that broken blade has cast me in this dungeon, and Englishmen, too little harm have they received. They slew my faithful father treacherously, my good brother, and many a good man besides. If this is this thy will, that they overcome everyone, on our people, Lord, when will you show compassion? Since my power is suddenly gone, you, O Lord, must lead our people. And as I am of no more use, take my life from me now. In this prison I lie, a victim of mischief. Poor wretched Scotland has great need of help. This nation stands in dread of cruel excesses. Do you, my God, never see our people suffering? If it helps Scotland, my very life I will forego. You know I have nothing else to give. Now, interestingly, in future chapters, we're actually going to see a direct response to this prayer. Spoiler alert, Wallace does not actually die. Or if he does, he is brought back to life. But we are actually going to see this prayer answered. Like, everything that Wallace says in this prayer is actually addressed. According to the account of Henry the Minstrel, God does answer him. So, very interesting. We'll get to that a few chapters down the road. That's a little bit from now. It's a few chapters, but this is responded to. But let's continue. As he languished in the dungeon, Scots in the town offered prayers asking God to send deliverance. He endured these many weeks of agony. By the madness of hunger, he was driven to eat at the scraps of rotting food offered by his cruel jailers. The result was fever and dysentery. Wallace lay delirious. He was covered in his own filth, which had infected an open and untreated wound. Like I was saying, it's just It's either going to be disease or starvation, one of the two. His laboured breath drew him ever closer to death. The jailer complained to his superiors that the putrid odour from Wallace's cell had become intolerable. They told the turnkey to delay no longer, but to fetch him for execution. The man went down to the dungeon and found that the noble Wallace had expired. He hurried back to the jailers. He has paid with his life. When they examined the body, they were all agreed and presumed him to be dead. For Wallace, there was now no rescue. By common consent, they decided to quickly be rid of him by throwing him over the castle wall. They carried his body up to the battlements and threw it over. The lifeless corpse landed on the rubbish of the castle's midden, left to remain where it had been disgracefully cast aside. So Wallace is not even given a funeral. He's just thrown out over the wall, And, Wallace's relatives, his mother, his uncle, they've all warned him this is what's going to happen if he continues down this course. It's just the only part that's surprising is that, it didn't happen sooner than this, honestly. Because, Wallace's actions against the English were highly provocative and aggressive, and you don't agitate, an occupying military force like that indefinitely. At some point, it is going to catch up to you. And in all fairness, Ranald Crawford and Richard Wallace and his mother, they've all been warning him, you need to cut this out. You need to stop because the English are only going to put up with so much. Not that I'm standing up for the English. I'm just saying that under any sort of situation like this, under any sort of military occupation, if you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, you're just going to anger them all the more. And when they eventually do capture you, and believe me, they will, it's not going to go well for you. It's probably going to go like this, So it looks like that's it for Wallace, but still, like I was saying, his legend is growing. There are people in the town who are praying for him, who are trying to get him released. I mean, not that that's ever going to happen, well, especially now that he's dead, or supposedly dead, but you get my point. Like, the English were never going to let him go. Never. You don't do what Wallace did and walk out of it alive. It's just not going to happen. But anyway, let's continue. Word soon spread throughout the town and came to the ear of a woman who had been Wallace's nurse from his infancy. She now lived in that part of Ayr called the New Town. Heartbroken, she hurried to the castle, to the spot where he lay, and called on the English, begging their permission to take his body away for burial. Eventually, after taunting her with heartless asides, they relented and granted her request. She gathered the limp, wasted body in her arms, and with the help of others loaded him onto a humble cart. They transported the body along the road and across the river until they reached her house. She warmed some water, from which her servant washed the filth from Wallace's emaciated frame. Suddenly the nurse became aware of the faint flutter of his heartbeat. Then his eyelids opened, and he cast up his eyes. His old nurse wept for joy and smothered his pale face with kisses. The nurse's daughter had a child of 12 weeks. She pressed her breast to Wallace's mouth and suckled him with some of her milk, alleviating his starvation. They put him to a bed in a secret room where they would tend to his needs. Over the next few days, his condition was so fragile, as he was gently spoon-fed light food in an effort to build up his strength. The nurse made a grave at the side of her house and placed upon it flowers and lighted candles. To maintain this great secret, known only to her household, she played the role of a grief-stricken woman. In the presence of many, she would weep to keep up the pretense. She fed the invalid the best food she could obtain and set Wallace on the road to recovery. So yeah, Wallace was not actually dead, but very close. And you see like Hollywood movies and all this sort of thing about like big macho men and how tough they are and they can survive anything, and people just get turned off by that. It's just like, change the channel. And here you see Wallace, starved very, very close to death, suffered from dysentery and fever, which on its own could kill you, let alone with starvation added in. And what saves Wallace's life? The breast milk from a young woman, There's nothing typically quote-unquote macho about that, but it is realistic. Feeding people light food and gradually allowing them to recover and all this sort of thing. This is much more real. This is, I would say this would have a broader appeal because it's realistic. People up to a point can only suspend their disbelief. You have to make it relatable and grounded at some level. Yeah. But anyway, about this time there came into the district one Thomas the Rhymer, a man who was hailed as a prophet. Many believed that Thomas's second sight was a grace from God. His fame had spread throughout the land, and the Scots held him in high esteem. Thomas had come to the nearby monastery at Fale, visiting the abbot, who was deemed a worthy man. Thomas and he discussed the fate of Wallace. The abbot called for a particular servant who had been in the marketplace on the day of Wallace's fight with the soldiers. "What did you see that day?" the abbot quizzed. The servant recounted every detail. "I have never seen anything like it, nor heard the likes of it. It has seldom been seen in any battle between the Scots and the English armies. No other Scot would fight the English with such mad rage, or take them on in an adventure so perilous. You know that Wallace was captured and taken into the castle. I saw them cast his body out over the castle wall. They starved him in prison, refusing him food and drink." Not entirely true. They did give him food, but it was rotten food, and designed to make him suffer all the more. The abbot sighed and spoke with a heavy heart. "I think their deed will foster great enmity, for he was loved and came of a good family." Just what I've been saying. The English are digging their own grave here, the way they're treating Wallace. Not that I can totally blame them, but, there's a way you can handle these things that it doesn't piss off the entire population. The English obviously never got that memo. Let's see. "Your tidings are not good, but if they are true, I shall never eat again," announced Thomas, who had remained silent until then. "Let me conclude," said the servant. "A woman from the new town, when she heard Wallace had fallen, hurried to where he lay, and on her knees, right humbly, she begged them to let her have the corpse. She took him to her house to give him a decent burial." "If that is true, then I too must be dead," exclaimed Thomas. The abbot listened thoughtfully to Thomas's words, turned to his servant and gave him an instruction. "Go with all speed to the woman's house and see what you can find." So Thomas, being a prophet, knows that Wallace is not dead. I don't know, just through his psychic abilities or whatever, but he's not fooled. He knows this is all a ruse. The servant did the abbot's bidding and ran quickly to the new town. He reached the door and passed the grave. The nurse, seeing him approach, came to her door. "Who is buried in this grave?" asked the servant. "Wallace," she said, "who lived a hero." She began to weep, presenting a pitiful sight. The servant paid no heed to her performance. It affected him in a way she never expected, arousing his anger instead of pity. He moved closer to the woman in a threatening manner. The nurse then realized that he suspected that she was lying. She fell on her knees, crying out, "For the sake of the Blessed Virgin, let betrayal be banished from your mind. Swear by our Lord who made the whole world." "I swear I will never betray him," he answered her. "Might I see that he lives with my own eyes? He should be safe. The English think he is dead." You might want to keep it down there, talking a bit too loudly. She took him up to the room where Wallace lay, going past the long seat erected against the wall that hid the entrance. He spoke with Wallace, then left to hurry back to tell the abbot and Thomas. So it's kind of like, Wallace has come back to life. He's been miraculously resurrected. I mean, that's at least that's what's implied. Wallace's prayers have been answered. We're going to see that more literally and more symbolically in like the visions that Wallace has in the future. But yeah, I mean, this is all kind of an amazing coincidence. Thomas just happens to be in the town at the time. The abbot's there, the servant. It's all coming together very conveniently, and of course there's no such thing as convenience, or what is it? There's no such thing as coincidence, is even what I meant to say. But, the fact that Wallace's nurse just happens to be there, it's an incredible convergence of circumstances. Was it divine intervention? Let me know what you think in the comments. Very possibly. I mean, who knows? The servant told them the good news, and the three of them shared great joy and laughter. Then Thomas proclaimed, "Forsooth, a prophecy. While he lives, many on the battlefield will meet their end. He will send the English out of Scotland, and 3 times he will bring peace to the land. So great a fighter will never again be seen. All worthy and intelligent men, beware you do not misunderstand my tale. Maybe you will say, but Bruce, he was a worthy fighter. Bruce was also good and bold in battle when work was to be done. But Bruce, as is well known, was heir to the kingdom. But Wallace, for no earthly gain, 3 times he freed the whole kingdom, and in England called Edward out to battle. I will return to my matter again." And I'm looking forward to that chapter. That's a really good chapter, when Wallace invades England and calls Edward out and challenges him to face him on a field. Name the time, name the place, bring the boys, I'll be there. That's me paraphrasing a little bit, but that was essentially the message. Although he had secretly recovered, the whole country believed Wallace was dead. His dearest kin were none the wiser that he had fully regained his health. He decided he could no longer stay in the nurse's house. He sent the faithful lady, along with her daughter, grandchild, and servant, to stay with his mother at Elderslie. When the group had departed, he searched the house for a weapon, in case of need on his travels. Wallace spied a rusty sword in a corner of the room. There was no belt buckler, butt boss, or hand on the weapon, but he drew the blade and found that it fit well. It had belonged to an old man who had died in the house, and, though foul, it was made of noble steel. He chose to delay his journey to Riccarton for a short while, as many English often used that road. He desired to reach Riccarton soon to see his uncle and to obtain a horse and some good armour. Eventually he set out. After walking a few miles, he saw 3 Englishmen riding toward him, on their way from Glasgow to Ayr. It was Lancaster, the knight, with 2 of his yeomen riding abreast. Wallace drew aside as they came near. You just know how this is going to go. Lancaster issued a challenge. "You, Scot, abide. By the way you hide your face within your hood." Like I said, unless you're playing an Assassin's Creed game, putting your hood up is going to draw suspicion. "By the way you hide your face within your hood, I take you for a spy, or maybe a thief. Case in point. Sir, I am a sick man. For the love of God, let me go on my way." Wallace answered, but Lancaster remained suspicious. "I think you lie. By your restlessness you seem to me a common criminal. You shall come with me to Ayr, where men may identify you." Mate, I don't think that's going to happen. You should have just let him leave. Just let him leave. It's the English, you know? Well, it's not all English, but you get what I mean. In the context of this, you know, this is the English at the time occupying Scotland. Lancaster unsheathed his sword, a worthy weapon, and sneered when Wallace drew out the old rusty sword. Before the grin had left his face, Wallace had struck him on the head, ending his life. His companions quickly dismounted and attacked. Wallace struck a deadly blow upon the first assailant, which caused the second man to run and attempt an escape. Wallace chased, caught up, and cut him down with a secure stroke to the ribs, exposing to view the man's liver and lungs. Must have had some strength to get through all that mail and all that padding to get right through his ribs and his bones. I mean, you talk about, you know, like I've said, you know, Wallace had the strength of a Andre the Giant. That's no exaggeration. Just cut through his mail like it was nothing, exposing his liver and his lungs. I mean, jeez, that must have been some blow. He walked back to their horses and found their purses contained silver coin. He was in need of some money and was glad of it. Thanking God for his safekeeping and good fortune, he took their horses, weapons, and armour, then proceeded in haste to Riccarton. You know, yeah, what does Wallace do for money? Kills English knights and steals their purses. That's one of the things in Braveheart that really kind of drove me nuts. I think I even mentioned this in the video I made, like what I thought of Braveheart and Outlaw King, is that in Braveheart, the Scots never use any armor to speak of. They never take the English armor, which is way superior than their own. And they just seem to leave everything. I mean, why would you do that? That's crazy. Take what you can get. you know, Especially if you're fighting a guerrilla campaign, there are no rules to speak of. Well, there will be a few, but you get what I mean. There's no like code of chivalry or anything like that to abide by. It's just survival. Survival is the only rule. And part of that is having weapons and armor and money and horses. So it makes perfect sense. A joyous assembly greeted Wallace's arrival. Sir Richard Wallace and his 3 sons were amazed. They had believed him dead, yet God had returned him to them. Uncle Ranald was at his home in Crosby when the nurse and her daughter arrived. They had made a detour to tell him that William was alive and was going to Sir Richard at Riccarton. After this, they continued on their way to see his mother at Elderslie. Sir Ranald immediately left for Riccarton, but remained anxious until he saw his nephew before him. When his eyes lighted on Wallace, he stood immobile and speechless for some moments. He strode forward, grasped William in a warm embrace, and kissed him tenderly. Overcome with emotion, he uttered not a word. He could not speak for a long time as he held Wallace tightly. At last, lovingly, he got out those words. "Welcome, nephew. Welcome, my dear son, to me. Thanks be to him who made the whole world. He has shown justice and freed you from that dungeon." You see the love between Sir Ranald and Wallace, how they're like father and son. I mean, not biologically, but that dynamic exists in their relationship. That's going to come back around, folks. And you can see how much, I said it before, how tight a family Wallace has. It's a very tight family unit. And there's a lot of love in that Wallace-Crawford family on both sides, His mother and many other close friends came overjoyed to see him alive. Good Robert Boyd, one of his closest friends, would not believe anyone until he had seen him with his own eyes. Worthy folk of great renown flocked from many parts to Riccarton. Thus I leave them in mirth, bliss, and happiness, thanking Almighty God for William's return. And just before I end this chapter, there's a footnote about Robert Boyd here. Robert Boyd rendered homage to Edward in 1291 for his lands in Ayrshire, although Henry claims that the Robert Boyd who rode with Wallace lost his lands for refusing to do so. Boydton lies 2 miles west from Crosby. The ruins of Portincross Castle, a mile below Crosby and standing at the water's edge, belong to the Boyds. The Boyd seal shows a small hawk or pigeon. Robert Boyd was captured in 1306 and hanged for aiding Robert the Bruce. The surname is derived from the Isle of Bute. Forden said it was called Bute from Both, or a shrine that St. Brandon set up on the island. Those born on Bute are yet called Brandanes, after St. Brandon. The Marquis of Bute is designated Morair Boyd in Gaelic. The first Boyds were vassals of de Morville in the regality of Largs. So a little bit of the history of Clan Boyd there, or the Boyd line. But yeah, so Wallace has miraculously come back from death, and his family and his relatives and Robert Boyd and all the others are all gathering to him. So this is the start of the rise of Wallace. This is the ascension of Wallace to the greatness that he is destined to achieve. And now that he's come back from death, remember, this is a very Christian society, very Catholic. It would have been viewed by a lot of the people as a genuine miracle, and his friends and loved ones and families are just overwhelmed. They're overjoyed to see him alive. And now, like I said, this is where Wallace is going to, really start to make his comeback and come into his own. He's come back from death. I don't know if it was literally or he simply recovered naturally. Was it divine intervention? You can let me know what you think in the comments. But either way, Wallace is back. And this is the start of the William Wallace of legend and myth. This is the man, the myth, the legend. This is the rise of Wallace. So anyway, thank you for watching.